All right, welcome back to DAZN MMA. Sean O'Connell and Dan Hardy talking about UFC 287 and the fallout from a very interesting card. Israel Adesanya reclaimed his throne at 185 pounds, and we saw maybe the final note. I think the final note, at least he's telling us it's the final moment of his mixed martial arts career. But Jorge Masvidal, Gilbert Burns takes that one down. Not a surprise to me. And Jorge Masvidal decides that now's the time to hang it up. Fighting in front of the home crowd, where his career started in Miami, came full circle for him. And Jorge Masvidal said that is his last professional mixed martial arts bout, which was his 52nd for those keeping score at home. 52 officially sanctioned pro MMA bouts, and we know that Masvidal probably had at least half that many that were unsanctioned. But your thoughts, Dan Hardy, on Masvidal hanging it up after the loss to Gilbert Burns?
It was, the time was approaching, wasn't it? I'm disappointed because, he's always been one of my favorites from way back in the day. The way that he was able to put his striking together, one of my favorite performances ever was against Rustam Habilov. He was just defending takedowns over and over again. Flying knees made an appearance. Elbows were in there as well. He's always been a great fighter. He's always been very, very game as well, which of course is, is what his nickname's all about. I wasn't surprised he lost to Gilbert Burns. I was actually surprised that it was as close as it was at times because, I expected Burns to take him down and drown him as quickly as possible. But there was quite a few striking exchanges in that first round. And, Masvidal's still got all those tricks up his sleeve. He's a wily veteran. He doesn't have maybe the physical power to make them count as much as he did a few years ago, but it still doesn't mean he's not, he's still a very, very dangerous individual. I'm disappointed that he's retired because I always enjoy watching him, but I think we'll see him back in there at some point. He'll be boxing Roy Jones or Anthony Pettis or something if he's out of his UFC contract.
Yeah, I think that I say this as a compliment because it's not true of every UFC fighter, every PFL fighter, every Bellator fighter. I think that he's like a true born fighter. I think there's just something about Jorge Masvidal who needs to be in that chaos to feel, like he's most himself. I think he's one of the guys that retirement is going to be incredibly hard, even though he's set himself up with a lot of money and a lot of business opportunities away from the sport. I think he's a true fighter, which is why you see him, at weigh-ins, in the hotel, after weigh-ins, whatever, ripping his shirt off and getting in the face of people who are like nowhere near his actual contracted bout, right? He has something about him where he can't, handle perceived disrespect. He can't handle the thought of not like proving to people that, no, I'll do what I have to do. I'll die on this hill. And that's something that I appreciate about him as a professional athlete. I appreciate about him as a fighter, and I think is going to make retirement very, very difficult for GameBred.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, because he's got such a cult status because of that attitude, it didn't really matter whether he won or lost.
Right.
You heard the crowd last night as he was walking out. He's transcended his record, and that's an amazing thing for someone to achieve. Kind of like BJ Penn did, and maybe Randy and a few of the other greats. It didn't matter that they picked up losses along the way because it was a part of their journey. And punctuating the losses on their record were amazing standout performances. Like, the standout for me, Rustam Habilov was a beautiful performance because I learned a lot from that as a striker. But to be octagon side for the Darren Till fight, which was such a dramatic moment. To Darren Till's family were there, the whole arena of course was there, for Darren Till. I did the face off the week, a couple of weeks before the fight, and it was, he just shone in those moments, just as Darren Till did. They were perfect counterparts to one another. But there have been very few people that have stood across from Masvidal and been able to bring that same kind of attitude and intensity. I don't even think Nate Diaz was really able to. I think he was kind of in the shadow of Masvidal on that on that fateful day of the BMF title being contended, and the way that Masvidal swaggered to the octagon on that night as well. I was tucked away and next to one of the security guards videoing it, and he ran out with his arms up. He was just cruising. It was his happy place. And we see that so rarely, people walking out to a professional fist fight where anything can happen, and he's in his element. It's a beautiful thing to watch, and I think that's why people gravitate towards him so much. Everybody, when they walk into their job on a Monday morning, especially if they don't like it, they want a little bit of Masvidal in them so they can deal with the day. And I think that's what he represents for people.
And look, he's a promoter's dream because of the fact that he's able to manufacture or, genuinely feel rivalry and distaste and dislike for whoever's standing across from him, right? Like, that is something that sold his fights to the fans, because there's such authenticity about the fact that this man is a fighter. He came from the streets, and he has brought that mentality here to a professional stage, and he's somehow more successfully than almost anybody else. I mean, the Diaz brothers are the other, I think, pretty obvious example of this, but Jorge Masvidal made like that street beef kind of mentality sellable on the UFC front. And he had rivalries in every bout. One of his rivals, Colby Covington, couldn't pass up the opportunity to try to drive a little nail in the coffin with some comments about Jorge Masvidal's retirement. Take a listen to this.
If I want to give my honest take, I mean, he was retired after I beat him. He's a broken man. There's a reason that he came out and did what he did to me in the streets. It's like a little clown. He's not there's no pride in that guy. So he just didn't want to have to live the rest of his life knowing that he retired off of getting his ass beat by me. So of course he's going to come and lose to somebody else in the division, because he just, he didn't want that being hung over his head that I retired him. But guys, I'll be honest. I retired Jorge Masvidal, Street Judas, in 2022 in T-Mobile Arena.
So Dan, Masvidal retired after fighting Gilbert Burns, but according to Colby Covington, that was just a formality, so he didn't have to deal with the last name on his record being Colby Covington. What do you think?
I think Colby Covington's in witness protection when he's not. I've got a UFC camera in front of him. I think Masvidal would fight him any day, anywhere. It doesn't matter. I just don't. I don't buy into anything that Colby Covington says, because I know he doesn't believe it either. I think he knows that Masvidal's a savage, and he wouldn't want to bump into him on the streets in Florida, or certainly in the gym. He just wouldn't. The thing is, Colby Covington talks such a big game, but then when you see him in front of someone that's actually got fire in their eyes, like Verdum with his boomerang in his hand, he just shrivels. Honestly, it's the weirdest thing to see, because he's got all this bravado, and then when there's actually a real fight in front of him, he shrivels. And I think that Masvidal made him very uncomfortable, because he could point that out so quickly, so easily. I just don't buy it, and nobody else is going to buy it either. And we all know look at what happened backstage at the O2 Arena, right? Masvidal had just knocked out Darren Till. He was standing being interviewed by Laura Sanko, and in the moments where we see fighters falling out, like Masvidal walked up to Leon with his hands behind his back and smacked him twice in the face. Like, fighters in mixed martial arts just don't do that, because they know where that separation is. It's almost like when we step out the octagon, we're safe. And Colby felt very unsafe around Masvidal, and I still think he does. So it doesn't really matter what he says. Masvidal will never retire when it comes to real street fighting, I don't think. And Colby Covington's always going to have his card marked.
That, by the way, is such a strange dynamic to me, because in a sanctioned, refereed professional mixed martial arts setting, Colby Covington showed that he's better, right? In that world, Jorge Masvidal has to fear Colby Covington. In the real world, I think the opposite is true. And that's a very strange dynamic, right? But that's probably true in a lot of these matchups. There are some people that are just built for it, and that is their life. And there are some people that it's a sport, and that's okay. And I don't think one is better than the other, but in the case of Jorge Masvidal, he's 100% authentic with that street mentality. And he came up from like the Kimbo Slice backyard YouTube videos. I mean, you can find on the Kimbo Slice bare knuckle on somebody's dead grass undercard. That's where we first saw Jorge Masvidal. And look where he's at in his retirement. Look where he's at in his retirement fight. He's in a sellout arena in his hometown with everybody screaming his name. I mean, very few careers have come full circle like that.
Yeah, for sure. The man's a rock star, and you know what he's contributed to mixed martial arts will be appreciated for a long, long time. And there's only one person that's ever had a belt that's got BMF wrapped around their waist, and that's Masvidal.
That was the dumbest thing in the world, by the way. Can we just agree on that? Like, I appreciate the showmanship and the fact that mixed martial arts, at least for one organization, has really crossed over into the sports entertainment realm, and it's going to go even further that way because of the merger with WWE under the Endeavor banner. But that BMF thing was just the silliest thing in the world to me. Like, you had The Rock come out and make a big announcement. Stop. Don't do that. I love watching Diaz fight. I love watching Masvidal fight. Don't throw a made-up belt on any kind of like matchup. I don't need to see it. That was so silly.
Yeah, it was kind of, the whole event was really weird, to be honest. You know, in New York, Donald Trump showed up at the time. They shut the whole backstage down, so fighters were waiting for ages to be able to get from warm-up area to walking out, and the whole event was just really, really weird. But like, you know, Masvidal just commanded the week all the way through. He was a rock star. He owned that event, and you know you've got to give it up to Nate Diaz as well. But I didn't see it going any other way, especially with the scar tissue around his face. What a performance that was, and what an event really. You know, for just as a marquee fight in mixed martial arts, where two guys that are by no means the best in the division are able to garner so much interest. It was almost like an old throwback to the old boxing days, where you know you've just got two 300 fight veterans squaring off against one another for the 10th time. It had a real kind of vintage vibe to it.
So if you had to make your short list of the greatest moments of Masvidal's career, does that BMF title go at the top, or is there something else that you're like, no, that right there was the moment for Jorge Masvidal?
You know, I mean, it was a good moment, but he looked too comfortable all the way through. I don't think there was much danger there for him against Nate Diaz. He certainly didn't act that way. But going into the Darren Till fight, you could tell how much he respected Till's power and striking and size, and that had to be set up perfectly. And you know, that was a very, very impressive one. But it's difficult to look past the Askren knee, because it was a coin toss, and had it come up the other way around, he would have been on the floor potentially for the whole fight. And what was even more special about it is that we saw him drilling it on the pads before the fight. He knew exactly what he was going to do. He knew which side Ben Askren was going to put his head when he level changed. If you watch him, he kind of comes out of his corner and like comes around at an angle to force Ben Askren to put his head in the position for the knee. I mean, just unreal. The whole arena it stood up, it went crazy, and then just went silent. Like, have we just really witnessed this? It was incredible.
That was, I mean, for me, that's the moment of Jorge Masvidal's career, because it made him a star on the mainstream. Hardcore fight fans knew who he was, knew where he came from, had respect for him. But the fact that he did that on that stage against the guy that I think the UFC wanted that to happen to Ben Askren, right? Because Ben Askren was kind of always the malcontent, was kind of always the best guy who was overseas, who was fighting in a different organization, and talking about the fact that UFC didn't pay its fighters enough, and they brought him into the UFC and they wanted Robbie Lawler to beat him to death, right? And Robbie was on his way to doing it and got the weird bulldog choke, and whether that was an early stoppage or not kind of is moot at this point. But the UFC, I think, wanted Ben Askren to get his comeuppance, wanted Ben Askren to get silenced, and Jorge Masvidal happened to be the guy who did the paid assassination for the company. He rendered Ben Askren in a lot of ways obsolete compared to what he had been. That was Jorge Masvidal, and that's why the matchup started to come, the cameras started to come, the money started to come for Jorge. So that moment right there was really like incredible. And the way that not only did we see him drilling it so that it was very clear it was not just a fluke, but then the way that he explained how his thought process went into like even creating that game plan, right? How the trash talk over the week told Jorge Masvidal that Ben Askren froze up when you gave him something he wasn't expecting. And so he said, if I changed my speed on him, and then you watch it in hindsight after hearing what Masvidal says about all that stuff, And yeah, he started walking slow and then he ran. And so the wrestler went back to his wrestling just like Masvidal told us it would. And bam, right? So that knee right there, we don't often get to see the seminal moment of someone's career. That absolutely was it. Obviously, for Matt Serra, his victory over George St. Pierre, for Conor McGregor, the 12-second knockout of Jose Aldo. Like, those are the moments in a collection of great moments that are like the one. And it's cool that we all got to see it.
For sure. Absolutely. What a legend of the sport. Always will be. He'll be talked about for many, many years to come as one of the pioneers that moved the sport forward into the public eye.